Across the United States, giant warehouse-like buildings are being constructed at a rapid pace. From the outside, they do not always look like much, but inside they power a huge share of the digital world. They store photos, process search results, train AI systems, support cloud services, and keep online platforms running all day and all night. These buildings are called data centers, and right now, they are spreading fast. More than 2 new ones are being built every week. That pace matters because these facilities are not small. Some of them use as much electricity and water as entire cities. And as the demand for digital services continues to rise, the physical infrastructure behind them is becoming impossible to ignore. A data center is basically a large building full of servers. Those servers hold and process enormous amounts of information. Every time someone uploads a file, streams a video, asks an AI tool a question, or stores something in the cloud, a data center may be doing part of the work behind the scenes. The servers inside these facilities never really stop. They run constantly, which means they need steady power, cooling systems, backup generators, and a reliable connection to the broader grid. That makes data centers very different from ordinary office buildings or warehouses. They are industrial-scale digital infrastructure. And because they run non-stop, they place a heavy demand on electricity. That is one of the biggest reasons the industry is growing so quickly. As more people use cloud services, more companies depend on digital systems, and more AI tools come online, the need for computing power keeps rising. That creates pressure to build more facilities and larger ones. The growth is not random either. Data centers usually cluster in specific places. They tend to follow access to electricity, land, water, and broadband infrastructure. They also go where tax incentives are attractive and where local governments are willing to support large projects. That is why certain regions end up with far more data centers than others. Once one facility opens in an area, others often follow. Over time, a cluster starts to form. And once that happens, the effects begin to spread beyond the buildings themselves. One of the biggest concerns is electricity use. Data centers need power around the clock. The servers need it. The cooling systems need it. The pumps, fans, lights, and backup systems need it too. And in large facilities, that demand adds up fast. A single major data center can draw a massive amount of power over the course of a year. When several cluster together in one region, the strain on the local grid can become significant. That creates challenges for utilities, regulators, and communities. Electricity systems are built slowly. New power plants, new transmission lines, and new substations take years to plan and construct. But data center demand can rise much faster than that. When the two timelines do not line up, the pressure lands on the existing grid. That can mean delayed infrastructure upgrades, higher costs, and added stress on the system as a whole. Another major issue is cooling. All those servers generate a lot of heat. If the heat is not managed properly, the equipment can fail. That is why data centers rely on cooling systems to keep everything operating safely. Some use chilled water. Some use large air systems. Some use a mix of both. The goal is always the same. Remove heat as efficiently as possible, but cooling is expensive. It uses energy, and in many cases, it also uses water. That is where the conversation gets more complicated. In cooler parts of the country, data centers may be able to rely more on outside air and less on water-intensive cooling. But in hotter regions, especially in dry climates, the problem becomes much harder to solve. That region already faces serious water stress. Drought is common, heat is increasing, and major river systems are under pressure. In those conditions, any large new demand for water becomes more controversial. Data centers need water to help cool their equipment. At the same time, nearby communities need water for homes, schools, businesses, and agriculture. When supply is limited, every new user creates more competition. That is why data centers in dry regions often draw so much attention. They are part of a broader struggle over scarce resources. And because the buildings are usually designed to be secure and closed off, the public often sees very little of what is happening inside. That lack of visibility is another part of the issue. People may know a data center is being built nearby, but they may not know how much power it will use, how much water it will consume, or how much land it will occupy over time. The scale can be hard to understand until the project is already underway. That is one reason communities are starting to pay closer attention. The land use itself is often significant. Data centers take up a lot of space. They may be built on large parcels that once served another purpose. In some areas, land that was originally intended for housing, agriculture, or open space has been converted to industrial infrastructure. That can affect the shape of future development. It can change traffic patterns, utility planning, and the long-term character of a region. It also raises a basic question. What kind of growth do local communities actually want? A data center can bring investment, but it usually does not bring a large workforce once construction is finished. That is another reason the industry can be controversial. Local governments may approve these projects because they want tax revenue and economic activity. States and counties often offer incentives to attract them. Those incentives can include tax breaks on equipment, land, and utilities. The idea is that the project will help the local economy. But the number of permanent jobs is often much smaller than people expect. That creates an imbalance. The public may get higher utility demand, more land use changes, and more strain on local systems, while the long-term employment benefits remain limited. At the same time, the digital services themselves continue to expand. People use cloud storage every day. Businesses rely on online systems for communication, logistics, and operations. Governments use digital infrastructure for records, services, and public systems. And AI tools are adding another major layer of demand. AI is especially important because it requires more computing power than many older digital services. That means more servers, more chips, more racks, more cooling, and more electricity. So the current wave of data center expansion is not just about keeping the internet running. It is also about building the infrastructure needed for the next generation of digital tools. That is why the growth is accelerating. The more AI expands, the more data center capacity is needed. And the more capacity that is needed, the more land, water, and electricity are required to support it. That creates a feedback loop. More demand leads to more facilities. More facilities lead to more resource use. And more resource use leads to more public concern. One of the clearest ways to think about this is to remember that the cloud is not actually floating somewhere above us. It is physical. It exists in buildings, on land, in cities, suburbs, deserts, and industrial parks. It depends on wires, pipes, generators, cooling equipment, and utility networks. Without those systems, none of the digital services people rely on would work. That is what makes this topic so important. Data centers are easy to overlook because they are designed to be quiet, secure, and out of the way. But they are becoming one of the defining infrastructure stories of the digital age. And the scale is still growing. As more people use cloud services and AI tools, the demand for computing power will keep rising. That means more construction, more energy use, more water use, more land use, and more pressure on the systems that support everyday life. The big question is not whether data centers are useful. They clearly are. The question is how much growth local communities, power grids, and water supplies can realistically handle. Because at some point, the hidden infrastructure behind the internet stops being hidden. It becomes part of the real world in a very direct way. It affects planning. It affects utilities. It affects land use. And it affects how communities think about their future. That is why data centers are becoming such an important topic now. They may not be visible in the same way as highways, airports, or power plants, but they are just as real. And as digital demand keeps rising, they are likely to become even harder to ignore. The modern internet depends on them. Artificial intelligence depends on them. Cloud services depend on them. And the next phase of digital growth will depend on even more of them. So while these buildings may look ordinary from the outside, they are doing an extraordinary amount of work behind the scenes. And that work comes with a real physical footprint. That footprint is what communities are starting to notice. And it is why the data center boom is becoming one of the most important infrastructure stories in the country. If you found this helpful, Hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more Housing IQ breakdowns on the trends shaping homes, communities, and the future of housing.